the apartment. It is great to have you with us today. Just checking and make sure that that mic is on. We're ready to go. All right, so today, incredible title, How to Turn Your 4 Units into 1,000. Amazing title. This is going to be accomplished. There's many ways that it can be accomplished. Today, we're going to talk about how to do that through a 1031 exchange into a DST. Before I get into that, they did come up, you probably saw it already, but it is now Prop 33. It's been numbered. The Justice for Renters Act has been numbered. And there it is. And you see this sign in the back. Oop, there it is. Sign in the background. That says Prop 10. We need to, no, it's not Prop 10. It is Prop 33. And we are already have placed the order for those signs. And thank you. So many of you have contributed to the AOA Political Action Committee, and 100% of that is going towards advertising to oppose the Justice for Renters ballot measure that's coming up in November. And it would be bad for everybody, bad for renters, bad for owners. And so yes, that's happening. And really our goal, the reason we oppose that, I mean, it's bad for everybody, but our goal for you specifically, for our group specifically, is that we'd have the most successful group of rental property owners here in the state. So we are striving to that end, and hopefully we're bringing you content that helps with that. We came out with maximum allowable rent increases for the Bay Area, which was a great video, by the way. I mean, so well done. You have to watch it. Even if you're from Southern California, I'd say watch it because of how we covered AB 1482. That was Richard Beckman that did that one. We did one for Southern California. We covered death in a unit. We covered e-scooter and e-bike battery compliance, things that you have to be compliant with now. Just a long list of things just in this last month. And so if you're not aware that we have a channel on YouTube, it's AOA USA on YouTube. And if you're on the AOAUSA.com website, there's the little YouTube icon. You click on that, it'll take you right there. If you're watching today from AOAUSA.com, stay there, that's great. And there's the little blue chat button where you can put questions in if you want to ask questions. And yeah, so April 8th, there will be another live stream. We'll probably fill some more in before that, but another live stream about SB 1383, that crazy recycling program, but just compliance with that and maybe some solutions. And also definitely we got a call this week from a reporter, and the AOA trash lawsuit is still in full effect. And they've definitely given us an illegal tax that no one was able to vote on. So we are still engaged in that lawsuit and looking forward to that being, to the judge making a decision on that, whether to register that as a class action lawsuit or certify that, as a class action lawsuit. So hopefully that'll happen soon. All right, August 15th, we're going to be up in Oakland, and we have a landlord-tenant attorney speaking about habitability and inspection rights. So that'll be on the 15th. If you're up in the area, please go to the AOA website, register for that one. And then, of course, the AOA Trade Show is coming up on the 22nd, and that's an all-day event, over 20 speakers, and we've definitely already, there's already over 150 different vendors that'll be there, and that thing is going to just sell out on the vendor side. So lots of vendors, new vendors, old vendors, and they have ideas for you as well, ways to help you save more money on what you're doing or do things in a way that is more efficient or more profitable for you. So we really encourage you to come out. It's free. We are partnering with the Union Rescue Mission, and they're doing a toy drive. And so if you bring an unwrapped toy, that will go to them, and they have a great way to put those to use. So hopefully you'll be able to contribute something to those that are in need. And so that's going to happen on the 22nd. over 20 different speakers, seminars again, and just so much there. And all right, so gosh, there's so much going on, so much that I could say, but it's time to get down to this and get to our topic today. And so I just want to give a shout out to H&S Wealth for sponsoring this event. They focus on 1031 exchange investments, and they also do traditional wealth management. They've been around for over 20 years. And for 20 years they've been working with AOA. I don't know how long. 25 years for the company. So our speaker today, he is an LA local and a real estate and securities professional for the last 20 years. He's a partner to Bob Horning at H&S Wealth, and it's always a pleasure to have our speaker today on. Adam, Bryan, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Jeff. I really appreciate it. Again, my name is Adam Bryan. I'm a financial advisor. For 22 years, I've been working with investors that are doing 1031 exchanges and helping them make a decision what to do. Ultimately, I really think of myself as a real estate guy. That's what I've been doing through the Great Recession, the run-up in real estate values in the early mid-2000s, the downturn in the recession, through COVID. So I like to think I've been through the good times and the bad. I've really truly lost count, but I know I have literally 300 plus investors over the years and have been involved in somewhere between 150 and $200 million in investments. So I've got a lot of experience in this business. I like to say I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly of it. Today's topic, how to turn your 4 units into 1,000, it's what we're going to spend the next 30, 40 minutes talking about. But maybe I should address up front why you would want to do that. And just briefly, if you own 4 units, let's say in Southern California, and you lose a tenant or 2 throughout the year, you're down for maybe a month or 2, during that time, you've lost 25 to 50% of your income, of your revenue for that property. When you own 1,000 units or 1,000 plus and you lose a tenant or 2, it's a Tuesday. It's meaningless. And in fact, in a weird way, it's actually a good thing, because when you have what we call roll or turnover, that means you're able to bring in a new tenant and increase their rent. Many of you I know have tenants for many years, and as each year has gone by, even in these last few years with the tremendous inflation we were just talking about, you haven't been increasing your rents to market levels. So when you have 1,000 units, it's a very different financial picture. You get these tremendous economies of scale. And when you own those 4 units here in Southern California, you are, of course, in the highest tax state in the nation with tremendous regulation. All the advocacy that Jeff and the AOA do to try to help you is a problem. It's difficult. But when you own 1,000 plus units, you could literally be in 4 different southeastern states in the United States, maybe 300 units per property. So you have now diversified your 4-unit, 1 building into 4 buildings with over 1,000 tenants, so there are 1,000 units. And you get that tremendous diversity, you get away from the regulation and the taxes. So that would be another reason you'd want to. And then lastly, when you own 1,000 plus units, you're not getting the phone call at 4 a.m., to have to bring out the plumber or wait for the sheriff, unfortunately, after spending months trying to get that difficult tenant out, or waiting for the city inspector to approve your new electrical. All of that's handled by a very large company, a professional management company that manages not only your 300 units in this given southeastern United States state, but they have probably 20 or 30,000 units under management. So they get the economies of scale of, for example, having lower insurance costs, lower management costs, lower repair and maintenance costs, because they are so large versus when you're just a single operator. Best of all, you don't have to manage them yourself. You're leaving it to these professionals. And that's really the bottom line about what I do. If you want to do it yourself, manage the properties, go out and find them, purchase them, finance, etc., great, that's okay. This is probably not for you. But if you are tired of management, maybe you've appreciated highly in value and you're thinking about selling, this would be an option to do a 1031, and we'll talk about how you can do that and why. First thing, though, before we can talk about whether or not to own these 4 or 5 buildings, perhaps. Should you sell in the first place? That's a big question. And the answer is maybe, maybe not. Some of you think it's absolutely a good time to sell. And right now, prices are still elevated and have increased in Los Angeles County. Some of you say no, the interest rates and the insurance, but the interest rates are much too high. You have perhaps a 3% interest rate on your mortgage, and if you sold and bought a new property, your mortgage payment would roughly double because you'd be getting 6.5% to 7% interest. So you might say no, it's not a good time. The answer is it depends on you. It isn't dependent on the market. People who try to time the market almost always lose. And even if it is a time where perhaps you would get less money or you would have a challenge with your 1031, maybe you really are tired of that building and you want to get rid of it. On the other hand, maybe you want to spend more time with your grandkids or improving your golf handicap. All of these are personal reasons that have nothing to do with the market. And I will tell you, I'm not here to encourage you to sell so that I can work with you on one of these Delaware Statutory Trust or DST properties. It's not my role. I want to help you attain your goals, what it is you want to do. And if I can help you achieve them through the type of investments that I work with, then great. If not, call me back in 10 years. Most people, when they think about 1031 and selling their property, they think they've got 2 options. I'm either going to have to pay the tax or go out and buy another property. If I pay the tax, I could rattle off for you, depending on how much your income is, you're looking at, to the federal government, 20% capital gain, 3.8% Medicare tax or Obamacare tax, that's 23.8 to the federal government, 25% recapture of depreciation. You get this wonderful depreciation while you own the property, and you're not taxed on those dollars. But when you sell and you cash out, as I call it, that means you have to pay back the government 25% of whatever you depreciated over the years, even if it dates back to the 70s. But that's not all. If you're in the state of California this year, you're looking at potentially 14.2% in the state of California. They don't distinguish capital gains from income. It's all just income to the state. But bottom line, that's what you'd pay. Most people are around 9 or 10%. If you make over $1 million, and if you're selling your property, you very likely will, you could hit the millionaire tax break and be assessed 14.2. When you add all that up, you're looking at 35, maybe even 40% of whatever you took out of the exchange that's going to go in taxes. So you're only going to keep 65, 60% of it or so. Those are reasons that most folks, unless they need that cash immediately, they do an exchange to defer that tax. And you can keep deferring that tax as long as you reinvest in deeded real estate or DST until you die. And when you pass, your heirs get what's called a step up in basis, and effectively the tax you would have owed dies with you. But the first option is paying tax. Most people it doesn't make sense for, maybe some it does. The second option is to go out and buy another property on your own, and nothing wrong with that. The challenge is when it's a good time to sell, does that mean it's also a good time to buy? And of course the answer is no. There's always that challenge, especially in a market like we're in now, which is very dysfunctional. Also, if you're tired of managing properties, then obviously bringing a new property into the mix isn't going to solve your problems. Very likely you're going to pay, you're selling at a good price, but you're going to pay a pretty price. You can try to go out of state, but of course that has its own challenges. That's where most people think the story ends. I would say right now it's difficult to say where the market is at because we are in a dysfunctional market, meaning, normal supply and demand we all get. There's so many people that need to rent. There's so many units out there to be rented by landlords. The challenge is everything's a little out of whack. As I mentioned, interest rates have gone up so high that a lot of sellers don't want to replace their mortgage with a mortgage that's twice the cost if they have a mortgage. For buyers, just a few years ago, they became addicted to 3% or lower even interest rates for about 10 years, 3-4% since the Great Recession. So, it's a reason that the market's not functioning normally. And in fact, we're seeing less than 50% of the normal volume of transactions, purchases and sales occurring. Well, when that happens, pricing gets out of whack. You don't have a normal quote-unquote number of transactions or comps, as I'm sure you're familiar with the term, comparables, to figure out what something's worth. Something can sell for a ridiculously high price, and something could also go for what seems very low. So bottom line again, who knows? Honestly, we were just talking about whether interest rates will come down or not. It remains to be seen. What I can tell you is that when you look historically going back to the 1970s, the highest interest rates ever were, and I'm using the overnight federal rate to give you a point of reference, is usually a few points more than that when you go to your bank. The highest was in the year 1980 at 20%. 20%. Right now, interest rates are, the overnight rate is at 5.0 to 5.25. That's where the overnight rate is. You add about 2 points to that, 1.5 to 2, and that's where you get to your 30-year traditional mortgage. 1980, we were at 20%. A lot more painful. I know a lot of you remember that. I was in high school. What was at the lowest? Well, twice in that time frame. In the Great Recession, the Fed lowered the overnight rate to 0 to 1/4%. And during COVID, the Fed also did the same thing. So 0 is the lowest it's been. But when you ask yourself, what's the average been? What's typically been the interest rate? Well, the average has been, interestingly, 5.4%. 5.4. Here we are at 5.25 to 5.5. So, is it a good interest rate or a bad interest rate? It's all relative, of course. But what I can tell you is historically, this is a kind of normal rate. 3% was historically unprecedented, and it lasted for a long time, and it created kind of an artificial market. Now we've gone back to a quote-unquote normal rate, which of course seems very high. So I think things just need to settle is the bottom line. The election needs to be resolved, and it will. The interest rates need to stabilize, whether they come down a little more. Some people think they might even go up a little bit more. Things will adjust, pricing will adjust, and I think we'll get back to normal. But is it a good time to sell? I don't know. That's up to you. Now, third option, and that's the primary talk today, Delaware Statutory Trust, or DST. They're sold as securities, so real estate brokers aren't involved in the transactions. They're not allowed to be advertised. I can educate you about what a DST is, but I can't show you one today. I have to know you in advance of showing you one of these offerings. It's a securities law requirement meant to protect investors. It started in 2004 through a revenue ruling, which was codified in the tax code. It means that instead of doing an exchange, you must own deeded investment real estate or like-kind real estate. You could also own a share, a fractional percentage of a Delaware statutory trust. And I'll talk about what that is. But that qualifies in the IRS's eyes as real estate, just like any other real estate. And most people, again, don't know about it because of the lack of marketing and promotion. You have to already know your financial advisor before he can share one with you. So here's some pretty pictures, give you an idea of what I'm talking about. The 300 or 400 unit apartment buildings, which I'm partial to, self-storage facilities, I'm also like very much. They can be retail, they can be office, they can be hotels, they can be Amazon distribution and warehouse center. It can be any kind of investment real estate. A Delaware statutory trust, it's like saying an LLC or a partnership. It's just a legal entity that owns the property. But when I talk about DSTs, I don't really think of it as a legal entity. I think of it as a property. It's just the way title essentially is held. But that's what the IRS said. If you exchange into what's technically called a beneficial membership interest in a DST, then you can do a 1031. And that's how we get to 1,000 plus units when you do an exchange. So when I talk about a DST, it's easiest to talk about who the sponsor is first. The sponsor is not me, H&S Wealth Management. It's the company, the real estate company, that goes out and scours the nation, underwrites, does their due diligence, and buys these properties, acquires them. They use their own capital, their own lines of credit. They operate and they're considered the trustee of the trust, and they're the sole member at this point of the trust. And once they have a stabilized property, they will bring it to market through advisors like me, through broker-dealers like me, reps, and bring in the capital that they put down as the down payment if there was a loan, or all the money if it was all cash, and pull their money out by bringing 1031 exchangers in. And that's how these are essentially sold and investors are brought in. Somewhere north of 95% of the investors in a DST are 1031 investors. You don't have to be, but they're very much designed for 1031 exchanges. The sponsor company is the management company, the asset manager, the acquisition entity, and they're ultimately going to handle the disposition or the sale of the property. It can be any kind of real estate. Different sponsors have different specialties. Again, I prefer, what I recommend are high-end or Class A or luxury apartments in growth markets, generally in the southeastern United States, call it from DC all the way down to Texas, sweeping along the coast there in Florida. Self-storage facilities is another wonderful asset class. Actually is very similar to apartments in a strange way, and we can do perhaps another seminar on why. Retail, for obvious reasons, I've been avoiding for many years. Office, you've probably been hearing and reading, even some small banks are concerned about all the financing out there on office buildings. I can tell you that the senior housing facilities, student housing, hospitality, hotels, they all have unique challenges, especially in a down market. And I've learned over the years to stick with the two top asset classes. They simply have proven that they hold up the best. In fact, through the Great Recession, self-storage on average increased their income and revenue. It's the only asset class in real estate that did. And obviously that was because of so many displaced people, people that had to get a roommate, so they had two couches and one went in storage. But in a good economy, people have stuff. About 1 in 10 households in the United States has a self-storage locker. So it's a reason to focus on that, and there are many other good reasons. That's pretty much all I focus on, with a few exceptions here and there. I'm more concerned about what I call preservation of capital versus cash flow and appreciation. All three are important when you own real estate. But to me, the first priority is you don't lose money on the investment, that you get cash flow every month, because that's so important to many of my clients, and that it appreciates, certainly keeps up with inflation, or maybe even outperforms the stock market like most real estate does. But number one priority is preservation of capital. I don't want to take a risk on a hotel investment that might make a lot of money if it sells in 3 or 4 years, but could also lose a lot of money. Apartments tend to be far more stable, and I mean Class A apartments, high-end apartments. Even through the pandemic, many of the tenants of these higher-end apartments were able to work remotely. So we didn't see too much of an impact, whereas the B and C class, and maybe some of your units, were dramatically affected through the pandemic. So those are essentially what I would argue are safer asset classes. What will happen is the sponsor will go out, scour the country, as I said, find a property, do all the due diligence, and there's, on a $50 million or $100 million asset, which is what these cost individually, there's a lot of due diligence that's done. There are a lot of eyeballs. Doesn't guarantee anything, as we all know, but I can assure you that third parties, disinterested, are looking at the property. They're looking at the environmental hazards. They're looking at the sound volumes. They do reports on that. They're looking at the condition of the property. Newer properties, obviously, are better conditioned and have warranties. A lot of eyeballs. They file the ownership with the county, the local, deed, is under the name of a newly created DST. In other words, every one of these DSTs are for separate properties or a portfolio of properties, meaning they're not like a REIT, an REIT you may have been familiar with, a real estate investment trust, where you own stock in a company that owns a lot of real estate and they're all merged in together. That's not what a DST is. Again, it's almost like a limited liability company or an LLC, but it's for each individual asset. But it's not like an LLC. It operates differently. It really doesn't operate like anything at all. It's very unique. But they'll create it. They create it in the state of Delaware, as you might have guessed. And everyone is separate for each acquisition. So banks love this model because if you have a lot of people owning a property, they don't want to underwrite up to 499 investors, which is what you can have in a DST. It's a single buyer. It's a single borrower if there's a loan. When you look at the deed in a county where a property is a DST, you'll see the name of the DST, not the owners of the DST. That's a separate level, which is confidential, not public. It makes a lot of sense, and it makes things easy to manage because ultimately, the sponsor makes the decisions. The sponsor acts as the trustee of the trust, so they're responsible to take care of the property. Some people say that's a bad thing because you no longer have a voice, you're not making the decisions. That's true, I'm not going to kid you. But on the other hand, you don't have to deal with any of it either, and I can assure you the companies that we deal with, we'll talk about them in a minute, have a lot of experience with this sort of thing. I mentioned financing. So one thing that's happened along with the higher interest rates that a lot of people aren't aware of is that the amount of leverage or debt that people are able to get on a purchase has come down dramatically. In the bad old days of the early mid-2000s, when our property was appreciating, banks were loaning 80, even 100% in some extreme cases, all debt. And we all know that a lot of residential homes were purchased this way. And that was foolish because, of course, when the market went down 20-25% on average, those homes and buildings were underwater. They were worth less than the mortgage, and you know how the rest of the story goes. Well, I think the government arguably overreacted in the Fed, and a lot of the agencies now, even for residential, meaning apartments, are lending somewhere between 30 and really 49 point something percent. I haven't seen a 50% loan to value in a long time. Personally, in my counsel, if you have less than 50% or 50% debt, 50% cash on your purchase, you're in pretty good shape. Meaning, think about it, the property would have to lose 50% of its value for you to be upside down. Even in the Great Depression, DE, properties on average did not drop that low. It's very conservative leverage. I don't think people should have too much debt, and I know a lot of people are debt averse, but there are benefits to using financing and not being 100% cash. But when we get debt, you're really seeing 30 to 50% loan to value, very low, very conservative. And there are many all-cash deals where there's no financing also available. Just depends on the way the sponsor structured the acquisition. They're going to now own the property, the trustee of the trust, the sponsor company, and they'll sell off beneficial membership interests. That's the technical term for your fractional ownership. And your ownership of these buildings is the same as owning real estate. I always tell people, if it were you and me, 50-50, we split the income, we split the expenses, we did our own separate tax returns, property sells, we split the profit after everything's paid, 50-50. Everybody gets that, right? That makes sense. In a DST, the IRS wanted it to function the same exact way, meaning there's no dilution, nobody's taking some of your depreciation, there's no excessive fees permitted. There are a lot of rules to make this like pure co-ownership or fractional ownership, and they benefit the investor, and it's why you can do a 1031 into a DST. The difference is you can have up to 499 investors. That's literally the maximum that the government allows. Because these investments are $50 to $100 million, usually you end up with less than 200 investors in these investments because each person is bringing in maybe $500,000. But that's kind of normal. You're not in partnership with these other co-owners. You don't know who they are. The sponsor is as the asset manager and the investment manager. They coordinate everything. They handle the communications, and they're very good about keeping investors apprised of what's happening on their property. The way that the IRS wanted this to be true co-ownership, it means that your pro rata share, your percentage, passes through 100%. And let me explain. If you own, let's make it simple, 1% of the DST because you put in 1% of the money to purchase it. You now have a document. You're essentially the deeded owner of 1% of this $50 million, $100 million property. You don't receive a deed. The deed goes to the DST, but you own a document that shows you own 1%. Okay, so whatever the cash flow is on the property, $1 million, you are entitled to 1%, $10,000 that flows through to you. Your share of the depreciation that can be claimed would be the equivalent of 1% of the improvement of the building that you can depreciate. 1% of the expenses. If there is a loan, the debt service, the mortgage payment, as you know, is deductible, and 1% of that goes on your tax return. It actually goes on your Schedule E, just like any other real estate. Those of you that own multiple properties know that you have multiple Schedule Es. You would be the same with a DST. It's just another property, as I said. But it has to flow through 100%. Again, you're not allowed to be diluted, and that's a good thing for you. Cash flow, probably the number one question people ask me, and it's a reasonable question. What is the cash flow? Cash flow is complicated the way it can be calculated. We have to talk about it in terms of before tax and before deductions. But to give you a straight answer, somewhere between 4 and 5% during the early years of the hold, net cash on cash, is what you can expect. And that's net of all expenses, all asset and property management fees, taxes, insurance, premiums. You put money aside in reserves sometimes every quarter. All of that, net of that, you'll end up with around 4 or 5%. On $1 million, that's $40,000 or $50,000 a year, and it's distributed monthly, usually through direct deposit into your account. Now, do you pay tax on $40,000 or $50,000 a year? You're all real estate owners, I assume, for the most part. And the answer, of course, is no. You're able to claim depreciation and certain expenses that offset your income. Same would be true in a DST. So that's the bottom line. They're very conservative in their projections of what they think cash flow will be moving forward. I always tell people to look at year one, and the rest of it's a crystal ball. You can only make an educated guess because nobody knows the future. But traditionally, they have been able to start in the 4s, creep up towards the 6s by the time they sell, as far as your return. When you think of your own property, most people miscalculate what their net cash on cash is. They think I rent the thing for $3,000 a month, that's $36,000 a year. And the building's worth $1 million, so I get 3.6%. I'm doing the math very quickly, but that is what a lot of people think. You have to factor in your downtime when the unit wasn't rented, the insurance costs, obviously the loan, all the expenses. Most people in Southern California, and I talk to hundreds of them, are netting truly around 2% cash on cash. So in fact, the DST can be an improvement on your cash flow situation. Not guaranteed, everybody's different. Obviously, some people are doing better than 2%, a lot of people are, but that is very common. And it's also because most of you have a heart, quite frankly. You haven't increased rents as much as you should to keep up with market rates. I don't mean to say that our DST sponsors and management companies are heartless, but they look at this as a business, and they're going to keep up daily with what the rate is on a unit that drops. That's why they like that turnover when I talked about having a vacancy. That's actually a good thing. And they're going to get you maximum return. Minimums. The other things, and the reason it's important that there's up to 499 investors is individual investors can come in with as little as $100,000 or less and buy into one of these DSTs. And that's why I mentioned being in 3 or 4 states with $1 million, 4 units, now 1,000 units, because you're able to diversify your capital, and each investment could be 250, 250, 250, and 250 in my example. That's one of the benefits. Again, you're not in partnership with these other investors, probably going to be maybe a couple of hundred of them. The sponsor does that. They're responsible, the sponsor, the trustee of the trust, for everything, for the asset and physical property management of the property. The old joke in my business, some of you who have been around and gone to these kind of seminars have heard this a million times, although I still get laughs, strangely enough, and that's you want to get away from the 3 T's, toilets, tenants, and termites. Or teenagers. That's my new one because I have a couple of teenagers. If you want to avoid those things, those hassles, the downside of owning real estate, this is a great solution. If you're okay taking care of those things, then again, this might not be for you. The best thing about a DST, in my humble opinion, is also the worst thing about a DST. It's the same thing, and it's the issue of control. When you're comfortable letting go of that, entrusting the company, and that's part of my job to help you get comfortable with who these sponsor firms are, then it's a great thing. If you want to make the decision when to sell, whether or not to refinance, who to hire to do the plumbing, all those big decisions, well, then this isn't going to be for you, and that's okay. Call me in 10, 15 years. Big one, when to sell, is a key question. Real estate cycles tend to be around 8 years, depends on the calendar, of course. But usually within 8 years, you're able to increase your revenue, your rents, whatever the economy's doing. Cap rates, which is the inherent value of the real estate, are going to go up, meaning it's going to be worth a little bit less, partly because of the aging of the property. Again, going back to liking brand new properties, they stay new for a good 10 years. But when do you sell? These sponsors are motivated, at least the ones I deal with, I can't speak for all of them, to return the best profit to the investor. They want to not only sell and do well on this individual DST or DSTs you invested in, frankly, they want to keep your business, because when you sell a DST, you're back to square one. You can do a 1031, you can cash out and pay all those taxes I talked about. You can buy another asset, another property on your own, sole. Or you can go into another DST. You do not have to stay with the same sponsor companies. But if that sponsor did a good job, they you'll tend to stay with them. And they report 80-85% of their investors do roll over, is the term we use, into the next DST. And they almost always have another DST waiting in the wings when they decide to sell. But they're going to try to capitalize on the best time to return your investment and make that decision to sell. And they explain it to you. But they do make the decision. So that's something to be aware of. They're going to make that call. Their goal is not to just flip these properties. The holds tend to be, historically, they're about 7 years. In the last 10 years only, it's been more like 5 years. And that's because of the rapid appreciation we've seen. We don't know what it will be in the future, but if you look on a long enough timeline, 7 or 8 years, which is a traditional real estate cycle, is usually the hold period. Liquidity. The other big question that many of you are probably going to ask is, can I get out of these things? Well, you can wait the 6 or 7 years and sell and then make that decision what to do next. Or you can tell the sponsor, I want to sell my interest, my $500,000 early. Now, there's no secondary market. I have to tell you that. People have been able to exit. The sponsor will notify all the other co-owners first and say there's a fellow investor that wants to sell, and it's a transaction between you and that buyer. They already know the asset because they're a co-owner of the same property. They're all real estate people because most people, as I said, 1031 into these things, and that's how the transactions have gone. When it's been a good market, it's been a lot less difficult to exit early or sell early. When it's been a bad market, like the Great Recession, there were very few buyers. And the people who were buying wanted to pay ridiculously low prices. I call them vultures. Very much like the normal real estate market. But there's no guarantee you'll be able to. I always tell people, assume you're in for the long haul. Lastly, I'll just speak about these sponsors. You want people with extensive experience who've done this for 20 years or more, that have gone full cycle, bought a property, operated it, and sold it. That to me is very important. There's a lot of new sponsors out there. I work with about 6 or 7 of them. There's an excess of 42. A lot of them came along since the Great Recession. Remember, it's real estate, has to be well located, quality real estate. Newer properties hold up values better. They tend to cash flow a little less because they're expensive, but the quality's there, the warranties are in place, you don't have to worry as much about deferred maintenance, and you get a higher income tenant. And that's really key, the demographics. You want to be somewhere with higher income, luxury people. You know, everybody gets hurt in a recession or in a pandemic, but frankly, people on the higher end of the income scale tend to get hurt last and least. So lower income apartments, they go through the most pain in a downturn. And that's why I avoid them. If they're older, they have more expenses associated with the building. And lastly, population and job growth. You know, California, Los Angeles has started to go slightly negative for the first time in its history as far as net population. The markets I'm looking at, Tennessee, North Carolina, DC, Florida, the Georgia, the Carolinas, they're looking at 1%, 2%, 3% growth or more, exceeding the national average. Well, you have more people coming in and less people dying. You need more units, and that's what I look to. That's an important factor. So covered a lot of information. We have a little box, I think, through the various channels that you're viewing this on. If you have a question for me, you can certainly call me. You've seen my number. It's available here. Or email me directly, and I'll answer you. I don't have an associate that handles that for me. I do it all personally. And I'm here to answer your questions right now if you type them in. Thank you for your time. Thank you, Jeff. And I'm going to, I think, hand it back to you.
All right. Thank you, Adam. All right, everyone. And I did not mention it, but Adam, you're going to have you're going to be speaking at the trade show, aren't you?
Yes, thank you. I forgot to mention as well. I'll be doing a power talk, and I will be in the double wide booth in the center of the trade show. That's my usual spot, right across from the AOA Wheel of Fortune.
What's a power talk?
Power talk is a seminar kind of similar to what I just did, but even shorter and quicker. It gives you a flavor for what I do, and I go into some other details I didn't cover today. And again, it gives you an opportunity to hear firsthand while you're at the trade show more detail than just talking to someone in a booth for 5 seconds.
Yeah, so we'll actually have, I think, 12 different power talks. So these are just 20-minute, short little bursts. You get an idea that you can take, and hopefully that's something that'll make an impact on your investments. And so we see that happen over and over and over again. Those little short power talks that are 20 minutes, and then we have the longer seminars that are about 45 minutes. And anyway, if you're on AOAUSA.com, there's the banner there, and if you click on that, it'll give you the details on who's speaking, what topics they're covering, and there is a whole lot. And we've even just putting out information that it's concerning sometimes when I see that not everybody's getting the information that we're putting out, information that really makes a difference. And even to give an example, LA County, they removed the charge sheet from the criminal record, so you can't see what the date of birth is, or the computer systems can't see it. So your instant criminal report for LA County is totally worthless. It's of value for the rest of for other parts of the country, but certain counties in LA, in California, it's not even showing that now. And even just that kind of information, we're really, really hoping that you use the live investigator search, where we're going to go have a real person go down and look at those criminal records, and also look at the civil misconduct, because that's not even part of a criminal search. And just even a simple thing like that, it's so important as you're filling your vacancies to fill it with the best people, for the renters that you already have, to have a nice, peaceful place where everyone can have that quiet enjoyment. And so that's just an example. And here we are, we're going to get into questions now. So if you have a question, please go ahead and put that in. And I see Market Watch, and they're asking, I've done a cost segregation. Is a DST required to avoid depreciation recapture, or could I still 1031?
Yeah, good question, technical question. I'll kind of simplify it for you. The person asking is still thinking in terms of a K1 or a REIT, where you own something that's doing its own thing. Remember, I talked about everything passing through 100%. So in a DST, how you file your taxes is your business. Everybody is separate. You just all own a little piece of the same thing. Cost seg, or cost segregation, is a way to take your normal 27.5-year depreciation schedule for residential and accelerate it, meaning I'm going to take the ceiling tiles and speed them up to 5 or 6 years. So I'm able to write off more in the first 5 or 6 years rather than spreading it over 27.5 years. Some sponsors will do a report that shows you those options. That's called a cost segregation study, and it's made available to the investors. About half the sponsors will do that. Some do, some don't. Then the investors, individual investors, each one on their own tax return, will file their own return and take depreciation as they choose. It's not up to the DST or the sponsor. It's up to you, just like normal. Oh, or could I still 1031 and avoid depreciation recapture? When you sell and take cash and not 1031, the IRS is going to hit you with depreciation recapture. The only way you can avoid it, quite frankly, is 6 feet under the ground. Sorry to be so dark. You can always 1031 as long as it remains in the code, and I believe it will. It's been there 124 years. Whether you go into another DST or you buy your own property after having owned a DST, you have all the same options.
Okay, all right. Let's see. Bryan, my property is held in an LLC. Would it be better off transferring the property into a member's name, then do a DST exchange, or keep the LLC to buy into a DST?
Bryan, it's a really good question, a common question for folks that are in an entity, and the answer is it depends. The entity itself is the tax entity, the LLC, Limited Liability Company. If you sell the property that's owned by the LLC, then that taxed entity, the LLC, must acquire another property in order to do a 1031. In other words, it would remain intact. That's the standard way to do it. What I've seen, and maybe not what you're asking exactly, but you're thinking of, is well, what if the sisters that are co-members of this LLC, they want to go their own separate ways, right? That happens sometimes. Well, what I advise people, first of all, I'm not a tax advisor, I'm not an accountant or a CPA, I got to stress that. Talk to your accountant or CPA. But what I do know people will frequently do is before they sell, well before they sell, They deed out that LLC into two separate entities. It's called tenant in common and will be on title. It's not a sale or a purchase or a taxable event. It's a quick claim. It's a change of title. So LLC owned the property. Now Sister A and Sister B own the property 50-50 in this example. And Sister A has it in her name. Sister B has it in her trust. Two separate taxed entities. Then when the property sells, each tenant in common co-owner can do an exchange in different directions. That's usually what's advised. Many people will tell you to do that change 2 years in advance of the sale. Now, I know a little secret, even though I'm not a CPA, and I can tell you that is not in the tax code. That is what is known as a best practice. That's what people will say because you're 99% more protected from an audit and having a challenge with the IRS. Basically, they're not going to look back more than 2 years. The reality is, sometimes it happens very soon before the sale, and it makes sense. I can't tell you whether to do it or not. Again, you want to talk to your advisor. All I can tell you is that the tax code does not require a 2-year wait, and the only way to exchange separately is to have two separate entities sell the what we call down leg, or the relinquished property, and then two separate properties can be the up leg, two completely separate ones. It's a way for siblings that aren't getting along to go their separate ways.
Gotcha. All right. Well, if you have any other questions, now is definitely the time to put the question in, and we'll get that to Adam. Yeah, so tell us, do you see, so right now, like let's say someone a month ago that did a DST, what's the cash flow looking like?
Right now we're seeing around 4 to 5% in the first year, and because we talked about inflation, interestingly rents, or shelter they call it, which is the equivalent rent of a mortgage or actual rents, it's a large part of the inflation we're seeing in this country. So on the negative side, of course, inflation's challenging for all of us. On a positive side for landlords, and if you've been keeping up with market rates, you're seeing more income. So right now, if a person invested, let's say $1 million, most people are between $500,000 and $1 million, you'd probably see maybe $50,000 a year net of all expenses that's going to be deposited in your bank account. And then again, you're able to take depreciation right off the expenses, right off the debt service. So most people are paying tax on maybe half that income. Everybody's different again. It depends on your own circumstance. But that's what you can expect from a cash flow.
All right. All right. Well, there you have it. Compare that to what you did last year, maybe, and see, look at it objectively.
Yep.
And make the best business decision for yourself. And as always, thank you so much for sharing with us today.
Thank you.
Thank all of you for tuning in and watching this. And anyway, definitely we have Proposition 33 on the radar. Hope you do too. And we really need to defend property rights. And you hear people say it's not about me, it's about we. And it's not about AOA, it's about us. It really is, because it's going to take more than just AOA. It's going to take each of us going to the ballot box and voting. It's going to take each of us spending a little money, investing a little money into the advertising to oppose this. And so we hope that I thank you for many of you that are on board, and if you haven't gotten on board yet, definitely make a contribution to the PAC or find another organization. Either way, we have a 0% admin fee. 100% of it is going to the just to advertising to oppose it. So hopefully you'll find a place that you trust and you're able to give, and hopefully all together we can stop it. One more time, number 3, right? All right, everyone. Thank you so much. Adam, any last comments before?
No, just grateful for the AOA's advocacy and the relationship we've had for 20 plus years, and we plan on another 20. So thank you, Joe.
All right. Thank you, Adam. All right. Thank you, everyone. Take care.